And then I like to ask people to notice, like, how much of you, meaning your body, your heart, your soul, your emotional complex, how much of you can actually receive being supported by the chair? And are there parts of you that actually are like resisting it or don't know how or can't slow down long enough or actually don't even want to be in contact with the chair?
This is a McKillop podcast. Welcome to So What? Exploring big ideas and why they matter. We hope big ideas lead us to more love, more peace, and more beautiful connections in the world.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our next episode of So What today. Michael, how are you today?
Doing finer than a fox haircut 4 ways.
That's great. I'm doing well and glad to be here too. We're so happy that you have joined us. And if you like today's podcast, we just ask you to like it, share it on your social media with friends and family. And today we have a very special guest. Stacey Madden's with us, and we are really excited to explore the big idea of somatics with her. Good morning, Stacey.
Good morning. How are you today? Nice to see you.
It's nice to see you. Yeah, we're doing great. How about you? And what do you want us to know about you as we kick off this episode?
Well, thanks for having me on. My name's Stacey Madden, and I'm considered a somatic movement educator and therapist. I specialize in the nervous system.
Well, you know, I'm at a very base level of all this. I don't know about Michael, but can you give us sort of like, what is this big idea of the nervous system, of being a somatic educator, and what does it all mean?
Yeah, so that's a big question to start with. That's a big, broad question. You know what I might start with is just sort of like the definition of somatics. I'll take like the Merriam-Webster definition of it. Some people know what it means and other people are curious about it. And this might be the first time people have even heard the word somatic or somatics. Mm-hmm. Fundamentally, soma means of the body. It's from Latin, and it just means anything that pertains to the body. That's sort of like the root word of all of it. And then one of the definitions of a somatic movement pioneer, Thomas Hanna, is the organism in its wholeness. So when I'm talking about somatics or some of my other colleagues, we're talking about a human organism in relationship to all other organisms in their wholeness. So emotionally, mentally, physically, all different systems of the person as one single thing.
That's big.
Big answer to a big question.
Yeah, no. So does that mean that, how would you explain it? You're saying the wholeness of who I am, who you are, who Michael is right now. Does that mean that, do I have a body? Am I a body? Do I own it? Am I just my mind?
Yeah.
How would you talk about that?
We're sort of recreating, and I really like to invite people to redefine their concept of self from being a meat suit that carries around a cognition and entertains it into actually that your cognition, your brain and your mind is your body. Your feelings and your emotions are your heart rate. That your way of being in the world are your joints and your skin and your eyes. And that there is no fundamental differentiation between what you think, what you do, and your body.
This sounds sort of new. Is this just developed in the last decade or two, or has this been part of human experience for all of our evolution?
Well, I think the way that we're putting it back together feels kind of new for folks, because for the last, hundreds of years now, in terms of scientific fascination with biology and evolution, and then with the development of psychology and consciousness, we've sort of differentiated ourselves as though we're these separate byproducts of being, and that the most important thing about us is our mind and what we think. And somatics is kind of this remembering in a lot of different ways, like remembering in the heart, remembering in the mind, but also remembering, bringing our arms and our legs back into our body, remembering ourselves as whole fundamental beings, and that our body isn't some sort of unnecessary, problematic, byproduct that sometimes has these really confusing emotions or things that we want to tuck away or an ache or a pain, that our bodies are actually a fundamental way that we experience the world. And primarily through our nervous system, our subcortical nervous system, which is all of the fibers that run themselves all the way through every single part of you and pick up information and send it to what we think is the organ of the brain or what we consider the organ of the brain. So this is a fundamental like invitation to bring people back into their wholeness, as opposed to feeling differentiated and cut up into a bunch of different siloed subsections of self.
Yeah, no, that just absolutely fascinating. It throw back to, even Greek metaphysics, where somehow the form is somehow better than what is, right? And it just seems that even, in my experience from more of a Western classical Christian perspective, that myth has been perpetuated over and over again. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, because what I'm hearing you talking about is just this integration or this movement towards wholeness. And it makes me think of this whole idea within my little world of holiness, where we used to think of it as, being morally good and, don't drink or chew or go with girls that do, but rather holiness to become integrated, to become whole human beings instead of having all these separate parts scattered all over, disconnected. But does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, what a beautiful dovetail. That fits together so well, that viewpoint of like holiness, like becoming whole again, right? And that, there's science even now that really supports that. The more integrated we feel with our bodies, the safer that we can feel in our embodiment, the less perception of otherness or boundary there really is in the world. That the safer that we are when we are contained and understand our own physiology and can, this sounds a bit mechanistic, but interface even with our nervous system intelligently, that we see other people as being fundamentally the same as we are. We can recognize their needs. It really is the opportunity to come back into community when we're embodied. And the word embodiment is just such a misnomer. It sounds very magical or something, very mystical, like, oh, embodiment. When are we not embodied? Like, we're all embodied all the time, but to varying degrees of like safe relationship with the self.
Yeah.
With how we function.
But when we seem to be conditioned that we are our thoughts,
Yeah.
right? And even our stinking thinking. I think there's something really kind of unique and healthy in what you're talking about.
And from a somatic point of view too, we sort of like view, it sounds a bit reductive, but it's such a great way to sort of introduce some of this material too, is we look at the three languages of the self, of the human. And notice what your mind is doing, even as I'm introducing the idea of like three languages. I just get kind of curious about how your mind might want to start to dice that up intellectually. The first language that we're all born with, to varying degrees and reasons, is sensation. We are just sensation-rich beings our entire lives. But the moment that we're born, and even, slightly prior to birth, all we are is this bundle of sensations. It's how we know the world. Amniotic, womb-like environment, the labor delivery process, which would be pretty intense, I imagine. None of us can remember it, really, into a cold world. Those first breaths must have been very painful for some of us. And then cold, heat, hunger, touch, warmth, connection. So that's our first language. That's our first understanding of the world, is sensation in the body through the senses. And not just the five senses, but the sense of like nerves and skin and feeling. The next language that we build out of that rather somewhat quickly is emotion. So now we have emotions that show up as signposts for our needs. Thanks for nonviolent communication for that little clue back into ourselves. So then we have these emotions that actually express what we need based on the sensation of the body. And as we develop and become more complex, our emotions become more complex. And then the last sort of language that we look at is mind, spoken language, thinking, or dialogue. But what's happened is we've decided that the mind is the most important part of us. And that's simply by virtue that our big human brains can think and talk to us. And it's our brain telling us that it's the most important organ according to itself.
Do you think it's somewhat our Western constructs? Because this idea of sensations, emotions, and mind is also found in the deep lineage of Christianity of Evagor Ponticus, who talked about the first things we do as sensations, and then later on it goes to images and emotions, and then finally it's thought and then action. But part of their practice was to actually understand the sensations. And in understanding the sensations, they believed you found wholeness and freedom. So do you think it's like the West construct, or is this remembering, trying to get back, inhabiting the sensations of the body?
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of making sense of emotions as well. Like I love that history too. That's so interesting. It really even brings to mind, some of the things that we hear, and I might understand this in not the right way, but even some of my understanding about very, very early Christians and Gnostic Christians and some of their behavior, practices and ceremonies around the body and touch and sensation, that we're very far away from that now, but some very early understanding about sort of ecstatic processes through the body too. But yeah, when we sort of take a more somewhat modern lens on like, why are we siloed like this? Like, why do we feel like we're so separated into our own head? I think a lot of that goes back to what would be considered Cartesian sort of philosophy and how that's sort of taken over a lot of, and it was helpful for its time. I mean, it was really important. None of these things are bad. It's all stepping stones back into, hopefully for many of us, liberation and a more peaceful existence fundamentally, right? But when we look at Cartesian philosophy, even this idea of like, I think, therefore I am, that's been embedded into all of us. Like that's woven into our skin and our nervous systems now and our self-perception. But what we like to think about in somatics is like, I am, now I get to think. I am because I feel.
Right.
Like I'm here, therefore I am, as opposed to thinking just gets to be one of those really awesome human byproducts. Well, I don't know, maybe animals think too, as far as we know, right? As far as my limited understanding is, as humans, that's like a glory of being a human, is that we get to think. But now we've decided it's just so important.
As you're speaking, it's exciting to me because I spent lots of years in a healthcare setting with spiritual care and walking alongside lots of folks in various stages and kinds of dementia. And just that whole struggle with even just the way, to some degree, staff approached folks in various stages of dementia, and even family member. And it really, really rooted in this whole Cartesian construct. But what you're talking about, what I think is so absolutely beautiful, is that in behind those plaque neurons is way more than we could possibly imagine. Like there's just so much happening there, and their person is still very much there. Am I stretching too far there? To me, it just strikes me as super encouraging.
Yeah, that sounds so beautiful. I mean, that really I can really feel that even in my own body, just imagining what your work must have been like. What happens for a lot of us as we age, right? Like what's a common thing that happens with dementia or other states of like what we consider like mental decay or something, right? A lot of folks go back to their earlier years.
Yeah.
A lot of people return to some earlier experiences in their life. A lot of folks return to what feels like infancy, childhood and infancy. What's the request of childhood and infancy? Touch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sensation, care, connection. The needs are somewhat simple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting in those states that music, at least my experience, music really engages people. The old songs or even new music, their eyes often will light up where just plain rational talking seems to, move through.
Yeah, and I think part of that is because it's a different part of the brain or the body that's responding to the more artistic stuff. Because and music too, but other forms of art are used quite well to help folks stay in community longer, because it's a different part of the, man, I'm really hesitant to say brain because it's so much bigger than that.
Right? It really is.
Yeah. So we
I
talk about a brain and a part of the brain that may light up, but my goodness, I feel music in my body. When I'm able to be creative, I feel it differently than in my skull.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so true. In my trainings that I run for folks who do trauma-informed trainings for caring professionals, so all nervous system movement embodiment sort of practices and exploration, one of my favorite things that we do is play music. So I'll have folks kind of get nice and comfy and sort of settle down a little bit. And then I have a speaker in the room that I play quite loudly, and I play a variety of different kinds of music. And the invitation to varying degrees of success is, don't judge the music. Notice if your judgmental mind wants to come in and start to tell you if you like it or not, or if that's your kind of music or not. Like that's going to show up. That's fine. But notice what happens in your body when I play these different types of music. Notice how your nervous system reacts. So I'll play, I have a background in yoga for many years. So I'll play lots of like sweet drum, sort of ambient yoga music that tends to really settle a nervous system for some people, not everybody. And then I might switch it to something like really loud, hard rap. And then I might switch it to some sort of indigenous drum. And then I might switch it back into something that's just a tone. And then so I'll play a whole variety of musics to really have people notice how responsive they are. Because fundamentally, like music especially speaks to another part of our neural complexity, but elicits emotions as well. And body, skin responses, tingling, heat, cool. But it's a part of our original language too. I mean, we are fundamentally creatures of rhythm and coherence. We live under a heartbeat for roughly 9 months. We walk with a rhythm. We sing and we dance, even if we don't feel like I hear that from lots of people. I can't dance. I have no rhythm. It's like, you might be surprised.
Yeah. I'm like Elaine from Seinfeld.
She had a great dance, though. I liked it.
Yeah, but I think there's something to what you're saying. I just think about various experiences that I've had, and just being moved by that. Okay, so my family hates me because I really like bagpipe music, and I don't know why, but it stirs me in my chest, in my belly, right? Like it just, I don't know how to describe it, but all I know is that I feel moved. I remember a friend of mine who was a professional dancer at the time, and this was years ago, and I was still Joe Hillbilly, and I'm sitting in the theater, and they perform this dance, and it's like, I have no idea cognitively what they're doing, but I'm feeling something. I am moved.
Yeah.
So I'm really fascinated. So I will add less commentary and explain why this is. What is happening?
What's happening what is happening when Michael, when you get to sit and listen to bagpipes, right? Like you mentioned that there's like a feeling in your chest and a feeling in your gut. It's so great though.
Yeah.
Like that's such a great example. And you spoke with such somatic terms. Like you have these sensations in your body that you can identify. And there's something sort of ineffable about it too. Like you're like, I just don't even know how to describe it. I mean, that's the hallmark of a true somatic experience, is that our brain can't quite understand it. It's not, we don't have a lot of somatic literacy. We're sort of taken away from our bodies in a lot of way. But when I work with people, like what I'll do is, if something comes up and they're able to tap into one of those internal sensations, the question will be like, can you stay with that? Like what's happening? Like, let's get curious about like, what's the feeling? And, is there an emotion that is associated with that? Does it elicit an emotion? Does it hold an emotion? What does that feel like? And what does your body want to do with that? Are there tears that want to move? Does your body kind of want to move around? Do you want to go into stillness? What feels like stillness?
Yeah.
And then we might get curious about the story that comes up with it. We might be curious about what the mind kind of wants to think about it. a little bit, but we try not to be overly cognitive because the mind will sometimes take us on this big, long journey out of our bodies, out of the sensation. But what are those sensations? Like in the chest, we think of ourselves kind of as like bone and muscle. I've got bones and I've got big muscles and they hold me together and my skin holds it all together and carries me around. But interweaving and holding this actually all together is our fascial state, which is the connective tissue in a variety of forms, stretchy sort of fabric, intercellular matrix fluid, like folds, seams. And it's that fascial structure that actually holds everything together and is what's sort of like moving and responding to our emotions. I call it the emotional fabric of the body. And right under the chest wall is our mediastinum. And it's this big piece of fabric that sort of holds the outer layer bag of the heart. The pericardium's on the inside. And it's what is consistently sort of always moving around to keep space around our heart. There's a reason why we have so much emotion in our chest, why we really feel things here. And it's that mediastinum, not entirely or alone, but it's that mediastinum fascial fabric in the center of the chest that's actually creating and holding, producing, and eliciting emotional feelings, sensations in the system. It's all right there.
So there is indeed a physicality, biological, physiological response.
Yeah, 100%.
Wow.
So a broken heart might be a true somatic experience, that sensation of not maybe a physical, broken heart muscle, maybe two, I don't know, but a broken heart as a somatic experience, it might have a reality to it.
Very much so. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to take our conversation down a couple of notches emotionally, but we have more bandwidth neurologically for what feels negative, difficult, or hard. We don't have a lot of internal pathway for the good. It's just it's the gift of our ancestors fundamentally, is that we have more neurological, biological, somatic pathway for fight, flight, and freeze.
Okay.
That's what saved us. We just have highways of that all the way through our system that we can get on real fast and get stuck on for a long time, as opposed to the things that feel easeful, good, and helpful. We just have a little less brain synapse connection there into the body because our ancestors didn't survive by being happy. That's the gift that we get because of their hard work.
Sure.
That's where they would like to see us end up, I would kind of imagine. But if we were even to think about grief, the feeling of grief, I think there's probably not a one of us who hasn't had a grief state where you feel it in your chest. For a lot of people, not everyone, but for a lot of people. I remember when I had a pet pass away, and it felt like, the way I described it was like a crumpled tin can in the center of my chest, pulled in. And it was a deeply somatic physiological feeling, probably because a lot of my internal fascia was actually trying to hold me together, maybe.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't want us to negative's okay, because that's part of reality. Right now, with everything that's happening with the orange blob in the States, the uncertainty with Canada, with the 51st state and the economy, as a human beings in our situation, we're facing a lot of possibly survival type things. And maybe if we can understand our somatics, can it help us regulate our responses to this 24-hour news cycle, the politics? How would you respond to that from a somatic viewpoint, Stacey?
Yeah, absolutely. If I even take it back a little bit, maybe I'm getting a bit too pedantic, so stop me if it starts to feel like a lecture or something. But
no, it's great.
If we take it back a couple of steps to our conversation, consider that our physical history, our evolution, our genetics, our brain pathway, our epigenetical structures, that's based on our ancestors surviving. They ran away, they fought, or they hid, and that's why we get to be here today. We have this wired system for, am I safe or am I not safe? And a big part of that is something called the vagal system, and a lot of that system is in our gut. So now we're in this position now for a number of years, since 2020, where we don't have a lot of stable ground politically, environmentally, or otherwise. Things are getting really shaken up. So what are our nervous systems doing without choice? It's not a conscious choice. They're assessing threat. Like, am I safe or am I not safe? Is this threat from the states? And like, let's not mince words. Their president verbally threatens our sovereignty. And that's to be taken very seriously. Very seriously. Like, we're all of a certain generation in this conversation. Like, this would not have stood 20 years ago, you know? And somehow it's kind of sliding in. So now we have a variety of nervous systems that are dialed up consciously or unconsciously into like a threat response.
Yeah.
Am I safe or am I not safe? Am I going to run away? Do I have to fight or do I have to lie down and hide? And so we have like functional states, even when we don't feel safe. One of them is functional freeze. We can get up, we can go to work, we can mow the lawn, we can tuck our kids into bed at night, we can check our bank account, try not to freak out too much. And we're just kind of hovering above a nervous system that's like the duck above in water, right? Like above, we're smiling, we're talking to people, and underneath it's just like this paddle, paddle, paddle. But I even mean that somatically, physiologically in our body. So now our heart rate is paddling, doing that like rapid work or shutting down and freezing up. Like, some people will really lose heart rate variability, blood pressure issues, especially gut and digestion issues. So now even the lining of the gut is starting to say, okay, we're not safe. I'm going to sort of shut us down so we can divert this energy towards if we have to run away or fight. So we'll see these different states show up in different places to varying degrees in the body. So if we're living now in like a political environment, which affects and will start affecting more of people's material reality, we're going to start to see more trauma response. We'll start to see a lot more trauma response and survival adaptations in overdrive. And that's what fight, flight, freeze is, survival adaptations in overdrive.
And the flight, fright, flee, free, I can't say, the flight, fight, and freeze runs through our whole body, like you're saying through the vagal nerve. Can you just say what the vagal nerve is for people who might not know, like just a little geeky biology for us?
Yeah, let's do a little nerdy anatomy here.
Yes.
So the vagus, not Vegas the place, but vagus, V-A-G-U-S, which means wandering. So this wandering nerve, some people think it's like, oh, is it like Vegas? Yeah, what stays there, what happens there stays there. No, what happens in your vagus nerve goes everywhere. But the vagus comes out of the neck, out of the brain, out of the spinal column, and then it innervates into our face. So all these little tiny nerve ending fibers, it touches the muscles of the eyes. We have around 6 muscles of the eyes, the optical nerve, the muscles of the middle ear in particular, the tongue, the throat, the laryngeal diaphragm. This vagus pathway spreads itself all the way down. It touches every single organ we have. 83% of its afferent fibers, meaning fibers that take information up to the brain, 83% of these thousands of nerve fibers are in the lining of the gut. Our small intestine, if we stretch it out, is about 7 meters long. So imagine how many nerve fibers are really even in just the small intestine. And then it also innervates like the pelvic floor, our reproductive functioning, the muscles of the body, the inner thighs. So some of the muscles or the nerves of the vagus pathway we can see visually, and some are microscopic.
Wow.
But it is continually picking up information. It's called neuroception. It's picking up information inside of our body and outside of our body. And it's sending all of that data up to the brain, up into the midbrain, roughly the hypothalamus, that sort of limbic area. And it's asking, am I safe or am I not safe? Is this food safe or not safe? Is that person safe or not safe? Is the news safe or not safe? Was that thought safe or not safe? I just swallowed. Was that safe or not safe? Everything is continuously kind of being filtered through. It sounds like it must be the most important part of our nervous system. It's not. It's not the most important part. It's just it's the easiest to access because it's just everywhere. It's the most informed. It takes up the most space. So that vagus nerve is assessing all the time to varying degrees and then sending that message up to the brain, the midbrain roughly. And then that midbrain, like Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, here's our frontal cortex, here's our midbrain. This part of the brain is now sending messages back into the body of, okay, this isn't safe. Are we going to run? That's flight. Are we going to stand and fight? Are we going to hold space and have boundary? That's fight. Are we going to start to freeze up high tone freeze, which is like a high muscular tone where our muscles start to really hold and kind of vibrate a little bit? Are we going to go to low tone freeze, which is like muscle tone drops and our spine drops and we start to go downwards? Or are we going to go into full shutdown collapse, which is like we might even pass out, vagal vagus or vagal vagus?
Wow.
So we have a variety of different choices that our brain will make and send back into our body through the musculature, through the fascial system, through our heart rate, through our digestive functioning, through our kidney functioning, adrenal glands, cortisol. And then we live like that. And it just feels normal.
Wow. So am I hearing you say we have one state of safety, maybe like a safety state, and then we have 5 states of unsafe experiences?
There's that brain pathway stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But these states can be blended together. So this is some polyvagal theory is taught by Stephen Porges. He's kind of the big brain behind it. So some of these states can be blended. So if a person feels safe and social, that's the polyvagal term, or emotionally regulated, that's sort of like the current psychological term. My term for it is embodied presence. If we can be an embodied present, then we can access these states when we need them to help us. So play, when we want to play with other people, that's going to be a person who can be safe and social, embodied present, emotionally regulated, and go into fight, flight, or sympathetic nervous system. And that's a little adrenalized, and we can get up and dance, or kids can play soccer face to face and not get into a fight with each other. They can compete in a healthy way, or puppies can wrestle around. So these states can be somewhat blended together. They're not bad until they get stuck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Or if we're safe and social, embodied presence, emotionally regulated, and we can go into a type of shutdown or stillness, like that's when we can meditate or be mindful. That's when the body can perceive stillness as like healthy and helpful. So that's why in my practice of somatics, we don't use mindfulness or meditation as a tool. We regard it as an experience that reflects regulation.
Okay.
So I just opened up a whole other can of worms with that one.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Can I ask, do you mind, Michael, if I ask one more question here?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
The question, and Stacey, before we get into the spiritual stuff, if we get there, is, for instance, we're all reading the news, like we're trapped in the news. Is there, I think you've talked about before, because I've listened to you before, like there's 2 ways people might respond to how they read the news these days, and it will speak to the somatics, or if we're embodied presence, and maybe one is not right or wrong. Do you know what the question I'm asking about? Some people might read it a lot, some people might back away, and that speaks, I'm trying to find an example, it speaks to this polyvagal somatic experience.
Yeah. So
could you explain that?
Yeah. So I like to ask people a question about, especially with this hot news, 24-hour news terror cycle. We seem to be for the most part, right? With the happy stories sometimes tucked in there. But there's some folks out there, and I'd ask the listeners who are listening right now, or even yourselves, to sort of reflect on this and notice how your body feels about this. Like what if there's tension that builds, or if you feel relaxed. But there are some folks out there who really like to follow the news. And they have to track it because it actually allows them to feel safer if they're able to kind of keep a finger on everything that's going on. It actually helps their nervous system down-regulate a stress response. They can go, okay, that happened, and that happened. Okay, now I can sit here, I can turn it off and eat my dinner and digest my dinner accurately, and then I might go back to the news before I go to bed, even though everybody tells me not to, because it actually helps me sleep at night because I know what state I'm leaving the world in. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that response is often quite shamed for people, like just turn off the news, go outside, touch grass. Yes, all of that. But there are people, those of us out there who need to sort of keep track of things because it allows us to feel safe and we can manage that. And then there's other people out there who are like, I need to turn the news off. I don't even want to know what's going on right now, except for a few sort of things maybe close to home. That's what allows me to feel safe, is to not have the news on in the background or listen to political podcasts or whatever it is. And that's not a bad response either, especially if they're able to turn that all off and they can digest their food and they can sleep at night and they can talk to their friends and their family members and So these are different responses to what's currently happening in our world. Both of those responses, if they're healthy and helpful for you, allow you to be a whole human organism. You can connect with people you need to connect with. You're not fighting with them all the time, right? You're not in a fight response. You can digest your food. You can sleep. You can swallow. You know when you're hungry or when you're thirsty. Now, when is that not helpful? All I do is watch the news. I can't turn it off. When I try to turn it off, I have a racing heart rate and I'm not sleeping at night. Well, you might want to think about how much access you have. You don't have to get rid of it entirely, but is it now helpful, or is your system working harder than it needs to? Because that doesn't sound very safe. Or for other people, if I have to have the news off because if I even hear one thing, my heart rate goes up and I just have to go lie down on the couch for the weekend, right? That's where we somatically start to get a little bit curious about like what's helpful and what's not. So it's a question for everybody to ask themselves, especially with this like onslaught of continuous information and what the body might perceive as threat. Yeah. Did that answer your question, Trevor?
Well, it tells me how I can have a good poo in the morning, maybe.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. Because that's all tied with, safety, right? That whole, the vagus nerve will affect my bowel movements. And, if it helps me to watch the news, to have a good bowel movement, I'm for it or not.
Critically, yeah.
It's all about gaining self-embodied awareness in some ways, isn't it?
Yeah. It's really like developing what I like to call somatic literacy. Like we talk about interoception. Basic interoception is you can go into your body and you know when you're hungry, when you're tired, when you're thirsty, maybe when you need to use the bathroom. That's basic interoception. So that's great. We have that to varying degrees. What we like to develop in somatic literacy is a closer level of interoception. When I go into my body, can I assess where I might be feeling scared? Even reflecting on the news and the big orange blob in the States or like our current Canadian political experience, right? Like when I drop in, do I start to feel tension in my gut or do I notice my shoulders kind of go up, like the big muscles of the body, really the neck and the head, right? The shoulders and my jaw start to tighten up. Okay, that's really interesting. I wonder what I need. What's the need associated with what I'm noticing in my body? Can I meet that need? Generally, it's some kind of movement. Really, honestly, it's usually some kind of movement. It doesn't have to be like a yoga practice or an exercise or a jog. It can, but sometimes there will be a degree of movement associated with it. Or for some people, like the idea of even noticing things inside of their body feels really foreign. Like I have a body, I have emotions in my body. They're not just something I think about. I just want to think about my feelings. I want to feel my feeling, right? So for sometimes with people who feel a little more distant, we're not trying to always create more interoception because that can feel overwhelming or just not their sort of pathway in. And that pathway might be more external experiences like being in nature, touching a tree, going for a walk, having tea with friends to create that safe state and then being able to assess, does my body feel different now after doing that?
Jonathan Haidt out of the States wrote an interesting book, I thought, called The Righteous Mind. And the big picture is he's just looking at the differences between being and thinking, between what might be described as conservative versus, say, more liberal type folks. That distance apart, what I thought was fascinating with and made me think of this was this whole idea that we throw around these grand ideas about truth and what is right. But what one of his conclusions is that really what it all comes down to is, does it line up with our gut? And is that another way of saying that lining up with what soothes, what brings comfort, what calms that vagus nerve system, that complex?
Yeah, that's a beautiful correlation.
So it doesn't need to be true or beautiful per se. It's what its perceived implications are for the hearer or the experiencer.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why, it could almost be like a tagline on my website or some social media post that I do. Like, mindset coaches hate this when it comes to somatics, because when people get really complicated in thought process, like I'm just curious about, that's a reflection of their nervous system. Like, so if someone really wants to have a thought about like truth, right? I'm not very interested in like, well, let's just nuance this thought and get it. Like we're excellent thinkers now. We've got it down. We've really got it down. We're good thinkers now. But what I want to do is come back. Oh, sorry, my earbuds are kind of popping out. I want to bring them back into their body and ask, like, what does this feel like? What's the experience within? When we talk about something like truth or beauty, does it allow you to be more connected into your body? Do you feel rooted? Do you feel grounded? Do you feel regulated? All these words, right? Do you feel present? Can you be here? And yeah, I love that idea of like going back to the gut. I do a practice with folks that's called head over heart over gut practice. And it's not about like postural alignment, which I've just totally gotten rid of because I don't care about that anymore. Spent a long time thinking that was really important. It's really not. But I invite people to sort of like come into different parts of their body, like because of our screens and our technology, we tend to be very forward projected. So it's like our cranium is kind of, our eyes are pushing forward. And so what I like to invite people to do, it's an elongated practice, but I won't go through it today, but just a touch on it, is I invite people to try to come into feeling, sensing, or imagining where the center of their brain is at, and then letting it kind of rest over the center line of their body. And then letting the center of their brain kind of rest on top of their heart, which is quite central in the body, kind of connecting into where our heart actually sits in the system, kind of tucked in between the lungs, wrapped around with this fascia, this mediastinum. And then taking the heart and resting it over top of our gut, or our intestine digestive system, like over the breath diaphragm, and then underneath. And in this way, we're sort of connecting and allowing the intelligence of the mind to take a break because it gets to rest on the emotional intelligence of the heart. And then even that gets to take a break and rest on the gut intelligence, really, of our digestive system.
That's like being called back into the earth that we are, in a way, instead of thinking that we're stardust. Like often in spiritual things, nothing wrong with, I mean, we are stardust in a way,
cool.
but really it's pretty cool, but actually we're pretty dense earth matter. And it's that earthiness that is what's alive in some ways. Yeah,
absolutely. Like a very long time ago, I got to study with a woman named Flora de Mayo. She's one of the 13 Indigenous grandmothers. They're sort of an international climate action collective. Incredible. Look them up. I'm not sure how active they are anymore. This was maybe in the 90s, late 90s, early aughts. And she would plead for all of these like very well-intentioned, meditators and yoga practitioners and spiritual practitioners. She would plead, come out of the trees and put your feet back on the ground. Come out of the clouds. Come out of the stars and please put your feet back on the ground. This is where we need to do the work. And that was such a beautiful invitation because, it's almost it can potentially be a bit of a spiritual bypass to always be looking up and out.
Yeah.
Right? And there's work to do when we start to look in and down. Like the call to action really lives inside of our bodies, especially if we're feeling safe and if we're feeling regulated and if we're feeling safe and social, emotionally regulated, embodied presence. We are in connection with the greater earth body. There's no differentiation. Like the health of the planet is the health of the people and the health of the beings are the health of the planet. There's no longer any differentiation.
It's all going back to where we began, integration. Right. So integration.
Yeah. Remembering, like coming back.
Remembering.
Yeah. Remembering. Yeah. That's exactly it.
For those who are listening on the podcast and not seeing the YouTube video, you can do both if you wish. Behind me in the scene is lots of books. So you can tell, I'd rather be in the forest now, but I'm in books. But like, what are some of the first steps that, if this is new to me, and it is somewhat new to me, that I can live this remembering this big idea coming out of somatics and the polyvagal nervous system? Where do I start?
Yeah, like how do we've been doing so much talking and thinking about like the vagus nerve and how we spell it, right? How do we make this like practical? How do we actually like make this an embodied lived experience? One of my first ways to invite people into this is to feel the chair underneath you. Is to like really take the time to notice what's holding you up right now. Like to really start to slow down and build out noticing where we are in the present moment. And so we sit in chairs. We've designed and created these structures to really allow us to rest. And yet we rarely rest under them. Yeah.
How often do I feel my butt in the chair, to be honest?
Yeah.
Like, until you asked me that, I was like, there's a butt. I have a butt. And then my mind comes in and says, is it big? Or am I getting old now? I'm starting to lose muscle mass. I have one of those butts that are sort of, like the mind just jumps in after you said, I can feel my butt. Then I start judging my butt.
Yeah. Like notice how your mind wanted to jump in on that too, right? Like, thank you, mind. I always go like, I'm not ever trying to be mindless or like get rid of mind or thinking. What a fruitless task. Our minds are so overdeveloped. That's like outrageous to try to do. So what I do is I'm like, hey, thanks, mind. I'm so glad you showed up to get me to try to start comparing things. Great. I'm glad you're here. Maybe you could just notice a little bit more, like ride with me on this or take a bit of a back seat. So yeah, notice that mind wants to pop in and take us out of the experience just because it's good at what it does. But then notice your back against the chair.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like to ask people to notice like how much of you, meaning your body, your heart, your soul, your emotional complex, how much of you can actually receive being supported by the chair? And are there parts of you that actually are like resisting it or don't know how or can't slow down long enough or actually don't even want to be in contact with the chair?
Or how you start feeling tears.
Wow.
Because you don't allow support and suddenly there's support in your life. And it's always been there and you just aren't awake to it.
That's exactly it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Like all of a sudden we start to realize, and the chair is very neutral. It doesn't care if you like it or not, like the chair has no opinion of you. It has no opinion of your butt.
Yeah.
So when we can kind of like even tap into like neutral support, like how do I receive support? Because how we do one thing is how we do everything. It's very true. How do I receive the support of the chair?
Wow. Like, do you ever ask people to feel their feet on the earth?
I will. Yeah, I will. Some people that grounding is too far down that polyvagal ladder. Sometimes that it drops them too far down. It feels too threatening. It might send up like a sympathetic response. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. So I'm more interested in like centering and feeling supported than I am in grounding. Grounding I use judiciously. It's for folks who feel like that it's beneficial for them, but it's not beneficial for everybody.
So just a geek question, what's sympathetic? That's the first time you brought that word up.
Your sympathetic branch of your nervous system is that fight, flight, high tone freeze response. And that really is a huge part of your adrenal kidney complex, adrenaline and cortisol, and a tightening sometimes of your diaphragm, your respiratory diaphragm. So that's considered the sympathetic branch of your nervous system, is your get up, go part of your nervous system. Parasympathetic nervous system is considered your rest and digest. And that's sort of the other side. Or there can be too deeply parasympathetic, which we call dorsal vagal, which can be shut down. Okay. Yeah.
And then for you, I love clarity of words. What's the difference between centering and grounding?
Grounding often is an invitation to come down, to actually be in your feet and be on the earth and take your awareness downwards. So for some people who are in sympathetic fight flight response as a baseline, like they have anxiety, they have to go, 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 there's a tension and tightness, they don't have, like, slowing down feels like a threat. Like, it actually creates more distress in the system, irritation, frustration. So by asking them to go down and ground into their feet, they'll fight against it. they'll be like, I hate this. I hate meditation. This feels like you're making me stop. My body hates this. So we don't want to invite them into just doing, always coming into grounding. For a lot of people, coming into center can be more life affirming than grounding. Everyone can find that a degree of center into their spinal column, their head, over their heart, over their gut. And then they get to make the choice about if grounding is helpful or not. So I really like to invite people to use that as a tool somewhat judiciously. Because for some folks, it's too threatening to ground. Or for other people, they're maybe in a quote unquote depression. They're too parasympathetic. They're down that ladder and like low tone free, shut down, collapse. And asking them to go down more can feel like almost dissociative, too sleepy, checking out.
Is it possible that it can be reversed to where someone can be or be very aware physically of something, but can't communicate it, can't get their head around it? This is where I'm stumbling, right? Because there's been situations where it feels like you get a sense of X, and you can't find words, you can't communicate it, and it's not even cognitive until maybe sometime later that you're able to sit with what you experienced and go, okay, maybe that's what was happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that happens very frequently for the people I work with. I work a lot with a lot of people who come in and say, everything in my life makes sense, except I have this anxiety and I can't figure out why. I can't figure out why my heart is always tight, or why I'm running out of breath. I can't figure out why I'm having panic attacks. My marriage is good. My work is good. What's happening? And so now we have this situation with someone where they feel like their physiology isn't making sense or doesn't match up with what their life is doing. But when we sort of stay with the sensation of the anxiety, we don't even care about the thoughts about it. Like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. So we'll just leave that apart. We're not even worried about our thoughts. If we go towards what feels like anxiety, that fight, flight, sympathetic response, lots of words for kind of the same thing, right? Usually that story in the body or that held experience, it just hasn't had a chance to be fully felt yet. It just hasn't had a chance to sort of run itself through or have maybe an emotion that goes along with it, anger, tears, frustration. It could be many things, right? Which will allow a person to come back into what feels like more coherence or regulation.
Okay.
And then we don't even need to make sense of it. Like the mind might make sense of it later. You know, lots of times people will be like, wow, I lived with a lot of anxiety as a kid. I've come to realize that I was pretty stressed as like a teenager or something, right? That's all well and fine that we've learned that. But we don't need to know that to work with the sensation in the body that doesn't make sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So this has been a fascinating conversation, and what we like to do is ask people to land this in terra forma, which I feel like we've been doing our whole conversation. We've been landing this in a real physical dynamic way. So in like 2 seconds, summarize everything you just said and why it matters.
Somatics, so what?
Right?
Yeah.
So what is it about somatics? Like, why is any of this important if we're all doing it anyway, kind of to varying degrees? So what I would say to sort of like capstone this a little bit is, I'm not asking for people to love their bodies. That's a big ask. I don't know if we can do that. That's not the request. We're not asking about loving the body. Maybe that comes later. My ask for people, invitation into their system is to notice that something is happening, that there's a request happening from the system that will help us be more connected, more liberated, and feel safer for ourselves and other people, to help us co-regulate with other people, have other people co-regulate with us and feel safer with us when we start to actually listen to what we really know is the wisdom of our body, the wisdom of our system. It's innate. We all have it. We have access to it all the time. It's a huge resource when we become embodied. That's sort of that's the short version of the big so what safety.
Wow. I mean, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Stacey. This has been a fabulous episode. I want to say, is there anywhere that people can find out more from you
Yeah.
if they're interested?
You can find me on mindfulsomaticwellness.com. That's my website. I do some things in social media. I'm not very good at it because I find it dysregulating, but I do some things on social media. I'm running a retreat in May, so I do retreats, I do classes, online offerings every now and again when I have space for it. And I see people privately as private clients who want to work through their nervous system.
Good stuff.
Well, and I want to thank everybody behind the scenes on So What. Thanks to Jim and Rebekah, and thank you to all you who are watching or listening on all our different stations out there. Please like and share and comment. And if you have questions, please reach out to us. You can, we'll put that in the show notes, how to reach out. And we hope that this has been a podcast that helps you in your life today. So thank you, Stacey.
If you are enjoying this podcast, please like it, subscribe, consider rating it, and sharing it with family and friends. This podcast is produced by McKillop, Living Sacred Relationships.